to have a little bit of business here in the beginning so that you could all participate and understand where we are. And so I'd like to ask our secretary to give us a brief minute.
And it'll take less than a minute.
Okay, this is Ellie Gold.
I'm Ellie Gold. And basically, I'll just give you highlights of the year in case you haven't kept track with the newsletter or attended every single event that we've had. A year ago, we had our first speaker on a similar theme that we're going to be hearing today. Sally Crum was here to talk about rock art, or here over in Hotchkiss, in fact. Maybe some of you attended that presentation, which was very interesting. We've had two major fundraisers, our Mad Hatter Tea Party and Spring Fashion Show, and all the fundraising is to help us build up a nice pile of money for a new museum, to show foundations that we will have good matching funds, that we have a lot of support. So between the Tea Party and the Fashion Show, we got helped out a whole lot. And as Julie mentioned, we've had a significant focus on the museum building and the future of the building, and know with in no uncertain terms that we do need a new structure. So we're moving ahead step by careful step in that direction. And at the same time, as Julie mentioned, we've had a serious assessment of the building and the objects within it to learn how best to preserve them. And Barb, our curator, will go into more detail on that score. We've also been searching for a site. We haven't known whether it would be best to stay at the present site or to find something else in downtown Hotchkiss, or you can consider downtown Crawford. So our eyes were just open, looking at anything possible. But right now, it looks like the most feasible location will be our present site. So stay tuned for more info on that. We're working with the VFW on how best to house both their needs and ours. One of the other projects that's been happening is a photo project. 14 glass negatives came into our possession a couple of years ago, and now they've been developed. They're photographs of the road construction between Hotchkiss, Crawford, and Paonia. Complete with horse and buggies and men wearing outfits that are a little bit different than fellows are wearing today. They're just delightful. So we're working on a presentation in the spring, which Dixie can tell you more about. So that's something that's cooking right now also. Of course, another major event in our past year's history was the loss of Elaine Henderson, one of our founding members and curator and president and everything to the museum. And that was just before Elaine died. She just knew, and she said, "Ellie, we need somebody to take my place." So now we've moved into a whole new chapter with the Historical Society with two wonderful new co-curators who fortunately got trained by Elaine and can even find things in the museum. So Barb will talk about that as well. One more project that is coming along within the very early stages is we're going to, now that I'm no longer president and have time to put my energies elsewhere, we're going to start an oral history project, interviewing folks of all ages who've lived in the area for enough years to give us some good stories. So if any of you would like to become an interviewer, Marion Pearson over here is one of the people who will be doing that. Or if you have any names to suggest of people who can tell us about the old days and even the not so old days. And when you think how fast things change around here, even 10 years ago can seem real different. So please think about whether this is something you'd like to help out with or volunteer a name at least for. We'd appreciate that. So I think that sort of sums up highlights of the past year with some eyes into the future. Thank you.
And I'd like to ask Jan Kent to give us a little brief treasurer's report.
Very brief. Since the first of the year, we have received $1,025 in dues from you generous people. The balance in our checking account is $3,186.20. In savings, we have $125.54. The money market account is $8,614.16, and the CD is $8,177.51, bringing our assets to a total of $20,103.41. We have 9 new members, and 33 of you have renewed your membership, for which we thank you.
Now that's some treasurer's report. When I was president about 4 years ago, we had $2,000. So we're coming right along. I wanted Dixie to stand up and tell us a fundraising plan that she's gotten going. Dixie's our vice president, and she's also our public relations person.
Not very good at it either. Yes, our next fundraiser is going to be Friday, April the 5th. And it's a wine tasting. It'll be in Hotchkiss at Carol Wagner's Art Gallery. And it's being a wine, let me put it. A couple of months ago, Todd Sabatsky, who has Frior Liquors in Hotchkiss, called me and said that one of his wine distributors wanted, every year they do, they give money to charity. And he asked them, what charity in Hotchkiss needs the most money? And he said, looking for it, the Hotchkiss Historical Society. So they're gonna do the wine tasting. We don't have to do anything. They're doing all the tickets will be are $10 a ticket, and everybody who comes will get a wine glass. And out of that $10, we get $8 for doing nothing but listing our name. So I hope everybody put this on your calendar and please buy a ticket.
And are we going to have an exhibit?
And we're going to have an exhibit. The pictures that Ellie was talking about are going to be on display so everybody can come see them. It's something to look at.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dixie. That's going to be fun. Barb is half of our curator team, and she has got some volunteer tasks that you might be interested in. You may have seen them as you came through, but she's going to remind you.
Okay. I'm Barb Goffin, and you all look wonderful. When Jackie and I are sitting in the museum by ourselves, it's nice to think about the members, and this is a chance to say hi to all of you. Jackie couldn't be here today, but we wanted to let you know what we feel our job is at the museum. We feel we're responsible for managing the collection and are the gatekeepers of the museum. Our focus is preservation of the local history, and we're proud to be guardians of old memories from this part of the country. Our mission statement and collections policy are currently being reviewed and revised, and an example of what is going to happen is our photo policy will be changing. Currently, we have original photos in our photo carousel in the museum gallery. And by going to other museums in the area, we're seeing that we should be preserving those in special sleeves, and that what should be on display are scanned or copies of those originals. The originals are much too valuable to keep out. So what we're asking for you is if you can give a few hours of your time each year. Will it be an inconvenience? Yes, but it's not too much time, and you might enjoy it and want to do it again. You can bring a friend, and that makes it kind of a social outing. We also ask for your membership fee. You all have all been very generous, and we thank you for that. We are so new that we would love advice, ideas, fundraising ideas too, your organizational skills. If you have museum or library experience that you could share with us, we would very much appreciate it. As Ellie said, we were trained by Elaine Henderson, but just for a month, and then she was gone. So we've had to kind of feel our way through the museum on some things, and many times we wanted to ask Elaine, where is that? But so so far we've been able to find everything we needed to. Our objective is to feel pride in the generations of objects that we take care of, and we want you to feel that same pride when you visit the museum. So I'm going to pass around 2 sheets. These are copies that were on the table. They're kind of some work schedules, help we'll need to get the museum ready for opening on Memorial Day weekend, if there's anything that sounds interesting to you to do. And also things we need donated and skills we're interested in having you share with us. I'll pass those around now.
Thank you, Barb. I wanted to give you a letter that I'd gotten, Barb, to follow up on. We've got a lady in Montrose by the name of Merrill Lee Burke who is doing a book on stagecoaching in Colorado, believe it or not, and she's asking us if we've got photos, maps, stories, information, a stagecoach stop, anything we can figure out around here. She'd like to work on. So there you go. I guess right now is the appropriate moment to say thank you. And that thank you comes from me, but more importantly from the rest of the board that worked with Ellie over the last few years. And Ellie has built a very strong team of officers and working active people. She's changed the impetus of the whole museum, and we are certainly grateful to her. And so we've had a plaque made, and we wanted to give it to her because we are so touched with what she's done for us. For your invaluable contribution and commitment to excellent leadership as our president for the year 2000 and 2001. It's been an honor seeing what you've done. Thank you very much. Now what I wanted to do was just say our next business meeting is going to be March 11 at Jan's house, and I'm opening it up so that you all know that in case your interest gets piqued today and you'd like to come and participate. So it's 6:30 in the evening at Jan's house up there by the airport, and we just have a good time at those meetings, and things percolate up that you wouldn't believe.
We eat.
We wanted you to remember that we've got our membership that you can get paid today right over there by that little glass jar. We have a book table over there that Dixie and Lee are sitting at that features Mamie Ferrier's wonderful books, Longhorns and Short Tales, and they have 2 other good books as well. We have the silent auction table that Jim Clark is sitting by. It's got these wonderful bunnies made by Elaine Ebert and Catherine Colwell. Wonderful stitchers and perfect for Easter. So if anybody would like to put down a number for a silent auction on those, we'll tell you at the end of the meeting who gets them. And then, of course, don't forget to put your name on those sign-up sheets that are coming around because we'd love to have you help us. We wanted to thank also Stan and MFA George for once again taking a tape of this year's meeting so that we can look at it again on a videotape down in the museum or take it home. And I want you to know that they've been doing this for years, and we have a stack of them, and we have had some very interesting programs, and any of you have missed some, why come to the library and get them, and what a labor of love. Thank you very much, Georges. Thanks to John Moore for doing this little program so that I don't have to remember everything and you've got the nuts and bolts. And thanks to Jean and Lowell Lemon for this wonderful textile display on the theme of today's talk featuring rock art design. And I think Jean would love to pop up and say a little something about the table that she's put together and these things over here. Tell us what you like, Jean.
I actually told them that I really did not need to say anything, that I work to speak for itself. But the main thing, I'm so happy Jim is with us today because this brings up one of my chief interests. I'd like to point out, please look at petroglyphs and pictographs, the wonderful Native American art, but do not touch it. Please, 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 do not ever touch it. I feel it's very important to have records of the Native American rock art. I take many photographs, I do sketching and drawing, but I never touch the pieces. I also do these in interpretations, and my husband-in-law does many with me. We do them in bright colors because we quite often do children's programs. We do nursing homes, assisted living centers, chambers of commerce, and all over. But one of the main things I like to point out is was youth territory. And every time I talk about them, I like to remember that I feel we are all guests, and perhaps even unwelcome guests in the youth land. And I point this out for two reasons. First of all, I have enough Native American blood that I have a tribal roll number. I'm proud of my European ancestors, but believe me, I'm more proud of my Native American ones. I know many of the youth people, and we help with the powwow in Delta each year. And I know how many of the youth still feel, and they hope that we are respectful of anything Native American that we find. On this table over here are little wall hangings that are interpretations of Fremont rock art in the Dolores River Canyon and eastern Utah, and some of the rock art in Montrose and Delta counties. And the same as some of these pieces, we have a big piece that's the Black Canyon, and then a piece that's very special to June Littlefield and I, because we, by a chance meeting one day, we happened to be able to go down into Smith Fork Canyon to view some rock art on private property, and so that is the wall hanging on a small ladder. I don't want to take any more time from Jim's program, so after the program, when we're having refreshments, if there's anything you want to ask me about a specific piece here or other work that we do, feel free to do that, and also my husband more. Thank you for your time and interest, and it's always a pleasure to see all of you people.
Thank you, Jean. Well, now we're going to vacate the front bench here and turn it all over to Jim. What a magnificent find. Somebody with 25 years of archaeological work in our very hometown. You read his little biography in your program, so I don't want to take time reading that over to you again, but this is an experienced, able man with a wonderful background and lots to tell us about and show us. So we are honored to have you, Jim. Come ahead.
Thank you. I'm probably, when I start slides, going to need to adjust here to
Sure.
fit the screen, but
You tell me.
I have some more talking to do before I start showing slides. I actually sort of have 4 different topics that I wanted to cover, all having to do with the youth. I just heard the radio announcement for this program on Friday, and I was a little bit disconcerted to hear that I'm talking about Southern Paiute rock art as well as youth rock art, because I don't know anything about Southern Paiute rock art. I hope maybe this summer I'm going to work down in St. George, Utah area, and maybe I can learn something about that topic. But this pretty much is a discussion of Ute origins, Ute history, Ute archaeology of the Ute, and a little section on rock art. I have to make a disclaimer that I'm likely to wander around on topics that might not seem related. If you hear me talking about Aztecs or Polynesians, there is a reason. Bear with me, and I will be headed back to the Utes.
Jim, you suppose you could speak up a little louder? We can't hear you.
I could try.
Not carrying.
Perhaps I should go up there. It's going to speak towards you rather than away from you. Let me rearrange just a second. Get the remote cable here so I can do the slides when the time comes. This is scarier. So, who are the Utes? Most of us archaeologists and students of prehistory were raised on the Bering Land Bridge theory of immigration into the New World. That people walked across a dry piece of land between what is Russia now and Alaska during the last ice age, and down an ice-free corridor through Alaska and the western part of Canada. Recently, some folks have been proposing another theory that folks originally came to these continents on boats, paddling along the shoreline much earlier than the Bering Land Bridge people were supposed to have come. We have good data sites back around 12,000 years ago. This proposed maritime migration is supposed to be much earlier, maybe 25,000 years ago. We don't have any good evidence of this. The sites that would be associated with that maritime migration are all under 200 feet of ocean. Sea levels have increased when the ice melted, and it's a theory. It's a believable theory. I kind of like it. Where am I? I actually have for long believed that more than one group of people came to the New World and are the ancestors of the people we call Native Americans. I think perhaps more than one group came across the land bridge. It's possible that a group of people came in boats earlier than that. It's certain that people came after that in boats. The Yupik and Inuit people that we call Eskimo came after the last ice age, and they certainly paddled in skinned umiaks and kayaks. There were other people who came to the New World. There's at least one visit by Polynesian people across the Pacific. We know this because Polynesians had sweet potatoes, which are native to Peru and Ecuador. They may have left some genetics. They may have lived in the New World and be represented as Native American genetics. When I was a baby, my father was wandering around in Bolivia and northern Chile doing geologic surveys. And he met a priest who was an amateur archaeologist who had independently come up with this same belief, that he believed that the Incas were Polynesian people. And he believed that because of structure in the skull. Between the plates of the skull there are little tiny bones that fit in between these plates. They're called worming bones. And they're much more common in Polynesian people and in the Inca than are in the rest of us or other Native Americans. So that's quite possible. So, who is youth? Some of the best information that we have about prehistoric people moving around comes not from archaeology, but from linguistics. For example, linguists can show that Navajo and Apache people in the Southwest are relative newcomers. The languages change fairly quickly. And the differences between two related languages are a measure of how long those groups of people have been separated. A Navajo person can go to central Alaska and speak with an Athabascan Indian there and be understood. The languages are so close that very little time has elapsed since those people were one larger language family. The Ute language is part of a group that we call Numic or Shoshonian. It includes Southern Paiutes, Gauche Ute, Shoshone, and Comanche. Numic languages are part of a larger family group, language family called Uto-Aztecan, which obviously includes Numic languages and Nahuatl, the language spoken by the Mexica, the people that we call Aztecs. It also included Hopi, Pima, and Papago. We're supposed to call Papago To'ona o Oda now. And various northern Mexican groups, Tarahumara, Huichol, and Yaqui are also Utah-Aztecan speakers. Some fairly well-respected linguists also thought that the Kiowa-Tanoan language family was related to Utah-Aztecan, but it was so different that the language groups, that the people would have separated as much as 10,000 years ago. So if that's true, the Utes have been around for a long time, and new ones. They may well, if Edward Saper's belief that Kiowa-Tanoa is part of the Utah-Aztecan group, they may actually have come over as Clovis hunters walking across the land bridge, or even paddling those skin boats along the submerged coast of Bering Sea.
And I'll help you with the thing now. Remember, speak up.
Okay, am I speaking loud enough so that I'm a fairly soft-spoken person, I'm afraid. Are you hearing me? I'm sorry. I'll feel like I'm shouting. I'll try. You can just.
Can everybody see the slides, or would it help if they were higher?
You need a book or something underneath it.
Okay.
You need a bigger book.
I'll just put the case here under it and see what we can
No?
And plus
One more.
for the angle.
Better?
Oh, that's better.
You want another one?
2 more inches.
Okay. Take this one.
Should be good. Okay. I want to jump ahead 10 or 12,000 years and then talk about the Ute during the historic period. Most everything that we know about the Ute comes from records, written records of Ute interaction with the Spanish, Mexicans, and Anglo-American people. Through very early interaction with the Spanish, the Ute acquired horses, and they were kind of ahead of many other groups in this. By 1650, they were true equestrians. They lived on their horses. They quickly became horse traders and breeders, and supplied horses to other tribes who had less access to them. I just have a few pictures, historic pictures of Ute people. You were closely allied to the Jicarilla Apache. They intermarried with them. They variously fought with or traded with the Comanche, the Spaniards, Navajos, Mexicans after the Spaniards were driven out, and generally maintained hostilities with the Plains groups, the Cheyenne, Kiowa, Arapaho, and the other Apache groups. There's a little known outgrowth of the horse trade. We don't read about slavery in the history books, but the Spanish had a long tradition of capturing Indians and forcing them to work in the mines. And in the late 1700s, the Utes jumped into the slave trade. They were initially trading very finely tanned deer skins for horses. But their demand for horses quickly outpaced the supply of deer skins. And they started capturing their relatives, mainly Paiute and Shoshone people who didn't have horses and were easier to catch. They captured women and children from these groups and from other groups as well, and sold them to the Spanish as slaves. They occasionally sold their own children for whatever reason. They would tell them, escape and come back later. We need to continue on. These kids, mostly children, were a few people were sent to work in mines, but mostly these were domestic servants. Some went to California, but mostly to what's now New Mexico. And these kids were were treated quite well, apparently. They had a special name, hemisteros.
What was that?
Hemisteros, with a G. That they were integrated into families oftentimes. They did household chores and sheep herding, but they were baptized as Catholics, and at a certain age, given the option of being adopted into the family or released, sent home. Ure was a hemisteros. This is one of the reasons that he was such a great statesman. He spoke good Spanish, and he understood European concepts of economics from his time as a slave in a New Mexico household. In 1865, it was reported there were as many as 3,000 Indian children working as slaves in New Mexico households. By the time of Anglo-American contact in the 1820s, 1830s is when the trappers really started showing up here. And by the way, our own Anton Rubidil was deeply involved in slave trade. He was a slaver. But by the 1820s, the youth were the sole occupants of this area. They owned western Colorado, eastern Utah, and they ranged generally with impunity up into Wyoming, western Utah, to steal Frior children, down into New Mexico, to trade them out onto the plains, way out onto the plains. That was disputed by other groups of the Kiowa, Comanche, Cheyenne, and Arapaho would fight them when they found them. But they covered a large territory. The mountains were theirs. By this time, they had generally adopted Plains Indian dress and were living in teepees. They had abandoned the traditional brushwood shelters, and were living mostly in teepees. They also quickly adopted European dress with their own little twist. The relationship between the Utes and the Anglo people in Colorado was an unusual one. It was unique in that the Utes were held in fairly high regard, at least during the 1860s and early 70s. They were important to the people of Denver. They were trading buffalo hides and meat that the populace of early Denver subsisted on, and they were a buffer between the people in Denver and the Cheyenne and Arapaho, who were becoming increasingly cranky. The Utes successfully lobbied the government to give them guns. They said, all these white people are scaring the deer and the elk, and we can't get close to them with bows and arrows with these guns. And it will help them to attack the Cheyennes too. And they were supplied with guns. This when the government was working hard to keep firearms out of the hands of most Native American groups, they were providing them to the youth. There was a group of youths that were called the Denver Youths. They lived in Denver. The agency was actually illegal, but they built an Indian agency in Denver to provide for this group of resident youths. It was a little different over here when gold miners started moving in. There was a good deal of tension on this side of the mountain. But the youths, as most of you might know, signed a treaty in 1863, the Frior Treaty, which essentially made a reservation for white gold miners in the middle of these territories, the San Juan Mountains. There was an argument over the hot springs in the valley below Ure. It was included in the miners' land, and the owners agreed that the rougher states said that was never part of the deal, insisting on keeping the hot springs, at least for now. They were given free passes on the train. They could have the train to go buffalo hunting, and they did with frequency. One of those stories that illustrates this unusual relationship. I recorded a historic homestead. It was back in 1997 in the South Park, and doing a records research to figure out whose homestead that was. We were able to tie that homestead to a gravestone in the Lake George Cemetery. The grave said, Summit Marksburg, 1875, killed by Indians. Further research pointed out his grave was mislabeled. It wasn't actually Summit, it was his father, James, who was killed by Indians. Summit had moved away to California. But the following story is Chief Ray's version of how Marksbury was killed. Apparently, Mr. Marksbury, a Ute named Tawea, which is Antelope, had lost a horse that had been stolen by persons unknown. And one day, while traveling, he came across his horse in the possession of Mr. James Marksbury. And he said, "That's my horse, I want it back." And Mr. Marksbury said, "Well, I need this horse to get home." And Tawea then offered to sell the horse for $10 to Mr. Marksbury. Mr. Marksbury declined. He dropped the price to $5, and Mr. Marksbury still declines to pay for the horse. The record's unclear exactly what happened after that, but Tawea ended up with his horse. And Mr. Marksbury then started running around screaming and threatening people, and he came charging into Tawea's camp. 15 days later, with a rifle, took the horse and a friend with him, and it started to leave. He was pursued by two friends of Tawea. They were unarmed, both of them on one horse, and Mr. Marksbury then dismounted and threatened to kill these two individuals if they continued to chase him. Tawea settled this standoff by getting his rifle and shooting Mr. Marksbury. Mr. Marksbury had claimed he had written orders from both Uray and the Indian agent, Dr. Thompson, to reclaim his horse. Both of those individuals denied it and haven't written such orders. Tawea, Uray convinced him to turn himself in, and he tried for murder. He did. He rode to Florissant and turned himself over to the Indian agent. He was taken to Denver and tried. Mr. Marksbury's friend apparently declined to show up and testify, and the only evidence presented was Uray's version of events, which I've just kind of related to you. Charges were dropped, and Tawea was sent home. So this is incredible in 1875. Indians were killed for the slightest suspicion of having stolen a cow. If anywhere else in the West, this would be unheard of. And in Colorado, this is kind of an example of how we, for a while at least, got along with the youth. Cozy relationship ended when the buffalo were dominated on the plains, and hordes of miners and settlers started coming into these areas. The situation...
Can you speak a little louder?
I'm sorry. The situation deteriorated fairly dramatically when the buffalo were exterminated. The Utes did not have a role in Denver anymore. Their trade items were gone, and the Denverites had no more use for them. They started being acting like destitute and frequently drunken people, and the Denverites asked that they be moved somewhere else. In 1871, an agency was built for the Utes over this way, on top of Cochetopa Pass. It was called the Los Pinos Agency. Most people mispronounce that Los Pinos. But that means the nest of the pine for in Spanish. It's not a pine tree. The Los Pinos Agency was kind of an interesting situation why that was built on Cochetopa Pass. A group of a faction of people in New Mexico were interested in getting the contracts that would be associated with an Indian agency. And they convinced the legislature to include language in the enabling legislation of this new agency that it would be built on the Pine River, Los Pinos River, in New Mexico. The folks in Colorado really wanted the agency here and got around that by naming a creek up on Cochetopa Pass, Pine Creek, building the agency there. It was a rotten place for an agency. It's up on top of a pass. Winters are cold. It wasn't a good place. And in 1875, the agency was moved down to the Uncompahgre Valley, to outside of what is now Kelowna. The situation got worse and worse, of course, as more Europeans flooded into the area, and sort of culminated in the Meeker Massacre, the Thornburg Battle in 1879, and the northern Utes were deported from Colorado. In 1881, they were sent to the UNT Reservation in northeastern Utah. There was continuing trouble with the southern Utes, until they were confined on the two reservations in the southwest corner of the state. We have seen a small number of historic period Ute archaeological sites. I've seen historic pictures in western Colorado. Colleagues of mine excavated 3 different sites. One was with the help of the Colorado Archaeological Society. A rock shelter west of Mount Rose called the Harris Site, 581-2341. How we would identify it. Had two other open sites on the Uncompahgre Plateau were essentially surface collected with a metal detector. They were historic period sites. The Harris site was fully excavated. Remember this guy? I have a picture later on that kind of relates to him. I wish I knew. I do not know his guy's name. I'm talking about the way he's dressed. This is a map of these sites. This is the Harris site. This is west of Mount Rose, Sandy Creek, and Sandy Wash and Coburn Wash. The Harris site up north. And these two sites a bit south of there. I have some artifacts from these sites, historic period artifacts. This is an octagonal rifle barrel, a heavy muzzle loader, probably 68 caliber. It's a big gun. Apparently it was too big for use on horseback, and this youth fellow had a file, and he filed off about 5 inches of the barrel to make it more of a horseman's gun. These are 50 caliber rifle cartridges. They were never fired, and the bullets were dug out apparently with a pair of scissors. These folks apparently didn't have a 50 caliber rifle, and they could recycle the lead, probably cast round shots with a muzzle loader, use the powder in that muzzle loader. They're 44 Henry flat cartridges. These slides illustrate the unparalleled access that the youth had to firearms. That they didn't have to steal them. They had them. There's a round ball and bullets that fit those 44 Henrys. There's stone beads from the Harris site, and a silver concho. That's the silver. More beads. These are glass tray beads. Part of a Spanish-style bridle. Had chains dangling down below the chin of the horse. I'm not sure why. It seems like it would be distracting. There are seed beads also from the Harris side. A little arrowhead from the same side. No, I'm sorry, it's coins from one of those others. This is from 3854. A pair of scissors. Looks just like the kind of scissors that we might have. Very useful. This is a tin can that's been cut up with those scissors into little strips and triangles. And those triangles of tin can are then wrapped into cones. If any of you've been to the powwow, you've seen lots of cone tinklers on powwow costumes with fringes with little tin cones. That's what we were about. They weren't so rich that they didn't use stone tools. They had two bifacial stone knives from I believe these are from 1854 as well. More bridle parts, Spanish bridles. More cartridges. We have a 45-70 rifle on the left, a 45 Colt, 44 Henry, and a 32 Ballard with a matching bullet. also in the Harris site. Baking soda, this is what we're making, Frior. Baking soda can. Buttons, buckles, and earrings. Saw two of those historic photos. The men had large brass hoops in their ears. Somebody left theirs at the Harris site. This is a Spanish style bridle, fairly complete. This is from a burial, actually, a new burial over in Utah, 32 UN 1225. The spade type bit, these bangles that hang down below the chin, and a beaded headstall was beaded. Some from the same burial, silver conchos, a hair braid.
What was that, Ray?
It's a braid, it's human hair, but it's not, it was cut off. It wasn't the person who was buried, it wasn't their hair. It was a decorative item. Not well explained. Don't know why that was there. Want to jump back a little bit now before Spanish and horses came and talk about prehistoric or proto-historic Ute archaeology. We use the term proto-historic to describe this late period after the Anasazi folks had abandoned the Four Corners. Essentially, it refers to in this part of the world using Paiute. We think of the Utes as in the same breath as we think of western Colorado. But from an archaeological standpoint, they're relative newcomers. Current archaeological and linguistic theory has the Utes migrating out of southeast California about 5,000 years ago, breaking into three different groups that traveled north and east, becoming northern Paiutes and eventually in western Oregon, the Shoshone in northeastern Utah, southern Idaho, and in southwest Wyoming, and the southern Paiute in northern Arizona and western southwest Utah. It took them probably 4,000 years to get from California to those locations. The Ute apparently separated off from the southern Paiute sometime after that and continued this eastward march into western Colorado. Some of my coworkers would like the Ute to have arrived here as early as 1100 AD, but I think the evidence for that is lacking. The best good dated Ute sites that I believe the dates are around 1400 AD in western Colorado, certainly not earlier than 1350 AD. There's virtually no evidence that the Utes or the Paiutes interacted with Anasazi people. Anasazi was gone 1290 AD. They had left the Four Corners ahead of time. Ute sites are kind of hard to see. Photohistoric sites, if you have a wiki-up structure, you're lucky. Generally, you don't. The Utes didn't build stone buildings. They didn't camp in the same place for a long time and accumulate a lot of trash that's visible. So their sites are fairly ephemeral. When an archaeologist is looking for a Ute site, like I said, you might be lucky to come across a standing wiki-up structure like this. Characteristics of protohistoric Ute sites are these wiki-up structures, peeled ponderosa pine trees, groundware ceramics, and desert side notch projectile point. This is another wiki-up. Oftentimes they were sort of lean-tos against the standing live tree. They break branches down from the live tree and stack more branches up, generally covered with juniper bark, although some might have been covered with skins. The peeled ponderosa tree. You might have seen these things and thought they were porcupine trees or lightning strikes. A colleague, Marilyn Martirano, has documented more than 350 culturally peeled ponderosa trees in western Colorado. This was people argue about whether it was a delicacy or whether it was a starvation food. And when we ask the Ute informants, they always say, it was a delicacy, we like that stuff.
How do you tell the difference between a culturally peeled ponderosa and one which happens through animal or?
You'll generally see a cut mark at the bottom, chopped with an axe or perhaps a stone axe. That's really the characteristic, and it's peeled up and generally torn off. Sometimes there are cut marks at the top, but when you look, there often is a real obvious cut mark. The inner bark of a ponderosa pine is apparently quite nutritious. It seems like it would taste like turpentine to me. I've never eaten it, but we've dated quite a few of these trees using tree ring cores, boring through the bark and seeing when the bark was peeled. The earliest are in the 1740s, and they continue on up into the 1850s. They probably were around longer than that, but the ponderosas have a limited lifespan, and a lot of these trees were taken out during the logging phase in the early part of this century. Not a very good picture. This is the biggest piece of Ute ceramics that I've ever seen. It's the base of a round bottom jar. The brownware ceramics are usually plain surface. Sometimes they're made with a clay that has mica in it, so they might sparkle a little bit. Sometimes the surface is decorated. I have a corrugated. This is a Ute brownware corrugated variety. And sometimes they're decorated with fingernail indentations, little crescents, impressions from a fingernail. But the ceramics invariably had, as far as we know, a round or conical bottom. So you'd have to dig a little pit in the ground to set the pot down, or it would fall over. I don't have any pictures of desert side notch projectile points. They're generally finely made small arrowheads with they're triangular with notches on the side and a single notch in the bottom of the base. They're characteristic of the protohistoric Ute, but just to confuse archaeologists, the Ute would pick up pretty much any arrowhead they found, whatever style it was, and use it. So they tended to make these desert side notch points, but they used all kinds of arrowhead styles. So a lot of times these Ute sites are hard to see. How many of you would have looked at this and said, "No, that's a prehistoric Ute structure"? It's a collapsed wickiup with a couple of poles in it. Roundware ceramics are really not very common. You don't find them very often. I've probably found them in 4 different sites in the last 15 years. Like I said, they used all kinds of arrowheads. If you get on the southern part of the Ute territory, those same diagnostic artifacts show up on Navajo sites. The earliest Navajo ceramic is called Pinatah Gray, and it's almost indistinguishable from this Uncompahgre groundwares. They use the same arrowhead style. Down in New Mexico, archaeologists call it the Navajo tri-notch. It's the same projectile point. So getting to the south, we have a bit of confusion. The only good diagnostic to tell Navajo from early Ute is the construction of a fork-stick hodan. It's built a little bit differently than Wicca. Let's see. We have, despite all these difficulties, we do occasionally identify Ute sites. I worked for 2 years on the archaeology in advance of the Trans-Colorado pipeline construction. I mean, you might have seen that in action. We excavated a whole lot of sites that were to be impacted by the pipeline. 5 of them were protohistoric age. We had one up by Whitewater, a Ute site by Whitewater, another one west of Olathe on the plateau, and 2 of them over by Red Bay. Setting up a grid in one of those sites by Red Bay was a map of western Colorado. These are the two wickiup sites that we excavated, Simpson Wickiup and Schmidt site, one of them in Montrose County and one in San Miguel County. this is a map of the Schmidt site. I want to show it to you because all of these dots on this version are juniper trees that the bark has been stripped off of, not to eat like the ponderosa, but probably for clothing material on these wickets. Excavation of one of these wickiups at the Simpson site. Have a Hopi woman digging a root house.
Question on that.
Yes, sir.
How far down did you go below the surface?
These sites are fairly shallow. The youth component probably was 20 centimeters, no more than 8 inches. Most of it's shallower than that. They really.
Of course, that ground didn't shift around like it would in some places.
No, and you know, because of the short amount of time, relative short amount of time elapsed, you don't have a whole lot of deposition except around those junipers where you have all the tree dust. But you can see the edge of that excavation unit. They haven't really taken much dirt off of there at all.
Now, where was that?
This is up near Red Vale. Maverick Rock is the name of the area. This is another wickiup site that was later excavated. We did extensive carbon-14 dating on materials from, this is a deflated fire hearth on the surface. Another roasting pit. These stones were heated and used for cooking. We did carbon-14 dating from features like these, quite a few dates on these two sites, and we complemented the dating with tree ring dates from the wickiup poles and also from the stripped juniper trees that were scattered over these sites. We also did thermoluminescence dating on the pot sherds themselves, or the brownware sherds. Thermoluminescence dating is more complicated than I can grasp. But essentially, most minerals, when they're heated, will emit some light. And by heating these pot sherds and measuring the amount of light that's emitted from them, the lab can fairly accurately estimate the amount of time since that mineral was last heated, which was the firing of the pot sherd. If the pot sherd were in a house that burned down, you would be dating the burning of the house rather than the firing of the sherd. What we learned from doing different dating techniques, it really pointed out a weakness with carbon-14 dating. Carbon-14 dating dates not the event, but the material in the fire pit. Back up here a little bit. That tree that the wickup's leaning against, that may be 400 years old. It's still alive. If that tree were used for fuel, we wouldn't be dating. We'd be getting a date that was 400 years too early for the actual event, the burning event in the hearth. Another roasting pit feature in excavation. The flatline hearth is not used. This is on one of those sites, but this is much earlier. I've never seen a stone-lined feature like this on a youth site. They tended to have earth-sided roasting pits filled with heated rocks. This one was probably 1,000 years before the Ute occupation. What we learned from those dating techniques was that our radiocarbon dates were all too early. They're all about 200 years too early. The thermoluminescence dates from the same components, our earliest was right around 1411 AD, and the latest was 1778 AD for these liquids.
What people would this likely have been?
We use the term archaic to mean pre-farmer hunter-gatherers back 1,000, 1,500 years ago, back to 6,000, 7,000 years ago. This, I believe, is a fairly late archaic feature that's a couple thousand years old. And to answer your question, who they were, we don't have a clue. In terms of ethnicity, it's really difficult to trace people back further than oral tradition. This is in case you thought field archaeology was fun and games. It's often miserable, or cold, or being eaten by bugs. This is a grinding slab, a base in the tape from the Simpson Wickiup site. Hand stones, monos. You use small one-hand monos as opposed to the two-hand corn grinding monos that you see in the Southwest.
What were they used for?
Gathered wild seeds, grass seeds, pinon nuts, juniper berries, if you can believe it. Some of them eat juniper berries on occasion. You have to be pretty hungry. Gathered wild plant food. Those roasting pits. This is the plan view map of one of the wickiups that was excavated. Those roasting pits may have been used for cooking bulbs, root crops, sago lily, wild onion, that kind of thing. Big masses have been baked underground in a hot pit. This is an excavation map of one of these wickiups. What we learned quite a bit from excavating these, they tend to have the doorway facing towards the north, which is entirely different than the patterns. The plains teepee always face the east, the southwest, so the pueblos tend to face south or southeast. This was a surprise. The wickiup invariably has a central fire hearth, and next to the fire hearth, a big chunk of a heavy sandstone slab that served as an all-purpose table. Just to the right of the door, these wickiups tended to have big masses of juniper bark that appear to be dead. They're juniper bark mattresses. We have cooking and living quarters on one side and sleeping quarters on the other. This is a recovery technique that we call constant volume sampling. We're taking 10-centimeter cubes of dirt from the floor of this wickiup at regular intervals, and then that dirt is examined through a microscope. I personally hate this technique. I don't like doing it. But it does teach you some things. They were able to determine that in a couple of these wickiups, although people are sweeping up and throwing debris out, it stays fairly clean, microscopic fragments of bone around this sandstone table indicated people were pounding up deer and elk bone and cooking it for grease, cooking it to extract the bone grease. Boiled grease, when you subsist mostly on lean meats, grease is pretty important. Dietary important. Also could be used for cosmetics, for hair grooming, and for insect repellent. Another one of these candies with far more ephemeral wickiup. One thing, this is an artifact density map. One of the things that we learned by doing this, by just counting the number of artifacts that came from different locations in the site, that most of the activity took place outdoors. These are the wickiup locations here of some really heavy activity areas in these darker spots. Tool manufacture and different subsistence activities going on. Some other ones, not nearly as informative. Before I talk about deep rock art, I was going to talk about rock art in general. I love to look at rock art. I think it's a gas. I spend a lot of time seeking it out, but I don't really pretend to know what it means. I just trust people who want to interpret rock art and tell you what's there, what the artist meant. We don't have, our worldview is so different from that of a hunter-gatherer, even just 600 years ago, that we can't possibly accurately interpret their rock art. It may be fun to try. Recently there's been an enthusiasm for attributing all rock art to religious practices. Rock art is shamanistic practice. All of these are power beings. A lot of it is, I'm convinced. A lot of rock art has to do with religion. I think a lot of it records day-to-day events too. I've seen panels. I know of a panel in Natural Bridges National Monument. All of the all of the rock art is knee-high to an adult, and it's all just scratched. It's kid drawings, little crude kid drawings, and it's all down at kid level. It looks like there's a rock art school for kindergartners. I sat on a rooftop at Hopi next to maybe a 6-year-old kid. We were watching a dance, and he was bored with the dance. He was playing with a nail, scratching on his parents' rooftop. And in 5 minutes, that kid made enough abstract linear rock art to keep me busy all day recording it. And it had no meaning whatsoever except a bored kid playing with a nail. I think you see that. I think you see that out in the canyons too. The only rock art interpretation I ever heard that I liked came from a Navajo man who worked for me many years ago at Wapaki. We were walking to work along the base of a cliff, and there was a petroglyph of a human figure upside down on the cliff. And Ernest Miz said, "Look, somebody can walk there." There have been 3 major studies of west central Colorado rock art. We're kind of an archaeological backwater, or have been. A fellow named W.C. McKern did a study in the 1920s of a few panels in western Colorado. His manuscript was lost for about 50 years, and then it was found and published by the Colorado Bureau of Land Management. It's called Western Colorado Petroglyphs. His study included one panel at Shawinigan Valley. He observed that there were some differences in style, that some figures were pecked deep and some were pecked shallow. Some were obviously older than others because they were being repatinated and they were getting restained after the rock art was applied. And he noted that there were some that showed horses that had to be historic period rock. Bill Buckles did an extensive study of young composite plateau archaeology and came up with a rock art typology for western Colorado. He identified 2 historic rock art styles and 3 prehistoric styles. His historic styles are essentially based on the execution of horses, how realistically they're executed. The prehistoric styles, interestingly enough, his oldest style was what he considered to be the most realistic. And the most recent was Style 1, which he said had similarities with historic Ute rock art, but did not have the horses and the teepees and the buffalo, the historic elements. He said that it was the crudest, stick figures, essentially. Sally Cole is probably the accepted authority on western Colorado rock art. She also came up more recently with the typologies. She sees all western Colorado prehistoric rock art as one. She calls it the uncomposite style and dates it between about 1000 BC and 1000 AD, very general time frame. It has abstract, linear, and representational aspects. The representational aspects are mostly animal and human beings.
Question.
Yes, sir.
Way back, did you ever discover any, like, woolly mammoth drawings and things?
You know, there's some people claim there's a mammoth petroglyph in Indian Creek near Canyonlands National Park. I think it looks more like a pig myself. Taper maybe, a short nose. It doesn't have tusks, and it doesn't have a long trunk. So not that I know of. The oldest.
Because those mammoths weren't that far away.
No, there were mammoths around here, but whether people were making rock art at that time, 12,000 years ago, we haven't seen it. It may exist. I'm gonna start off my Ute rock art section by showing you stuff that's not Ute rock art. This is not Ute rock art. This is a handprint. I'm not sure if it's even focused enough to see. It's a handprint that's above an asphalt structure. This is the oldest style of rock art that we know of. This is Barrier Canyon style, maybe 5,000 or 6,000 years old. You see it rarely over here, more in the canyons in Utah. This panel is up north of Arches. Classic sort of anasazi pictograph from Salt Creek and Canyonland. This is Fremont from Muddy Creek near Emory, Utah. Some great fierce carnivores up here. This is Virgin River anasazi from Zion National Park. I like this girl, dancers, skateboarders, whatever they are. This guy, Howard guy with the staff. That's also Virgin anasazi from Alabama. This is more Barrier Canyon. This is the harvest panel, we call it, or the maize district in Canyonland. This is early Pueblo. This is a ogre Kachina near California, Mexico. More, that's a Quetzalcoatl, a feathered serpent depicted here. Some other Kachina. It's kind of hard to see. It's probably a Fremont shield figure superimposed over these Barrier Canyon figures. He's much later, thousands of years later than the original. This one's a trick. You might think it was historic rock art, but this guy over here is standing on a bighorn sheep. This is actually old anasazi print. You can tell I'm kind of stalling. I have very few good youth rock art pictures. I've been showing you some cool other stuff, but I do have some youth rock art. Some of these are the same figures that are depicted in the textiles here. I have a picture of your nine-legged horse from Shaolin. This is 5 up on Anthropology Plateau. You have some riders, buffalo, some other geometric stuff. These slides that I have, almost all of them are what Sally Cole and Bill Buckles would call the early historic style. The late historic style, you get a lot of painting, you get big red horses, some beautiful, realistically depicted red horses. I had, somewhere I have slides of those, but I could not find them for the life of me.
I'd like to interrupt a moment. Those pictures are the same that I've interpreted through the whole thing, right?
This is the Dry Creek plate.
Yes.
Oh, this is actually a drawing. A lot of times, rock art, you take pictures of it and then it's invisible on the picture. So we do photographs and drawings and we record cameras.
Well, now how old is that supposed to be?
Well, this is youth. This is historic youth. Bill Buckles puts the early historic rock art. He dates it from the time the horses show up, 1650
That's what I was getting
to
at.
1830. And then after the fur trappers showed up, it becomes far more realistic. The rock art, the depictions of horses and people become a little more realistic. This is a composite. We had a couple of, it's not a very good picture, a couple of nice anasazi bighorn sheep. Sometime later, a youth came along and added a youth hunter on a horse with a bow and arrow. This is from South America. Well, it's the elements that we know that the youth were the only people around when the horses were in this part of the country. So you see riders, you see mounted people. When you're talking about historic period rock art, and consequently in western Colorado and eastern Utah too. This is inside. This may be one of my examples of late historic rock art. The horse here is far more elaborate than most of the horses I'm going to show you. I like this crane or heron, whatever it is. Maybe a shield. It's hard to say what that means. The rider here is hardly detailed at all. The horse is much more elaborate than the rider. This is from the Little Dolores Canyon, kind of west of Colorado National Monument. This is the same site, but this is a drawing done in charcoal, very small, and our photographs didn't turn out at all. And my pictures are copies of the drawing. A lot of detail in this. We have horn and feathered headdresses on, a shield on a tripod, which is fairly common out in front of a lodge, where the shield is displayed. This is a high pommel, what they call a woman's saddle, big high wooden front and back. It wasn't just used by women, men and women both. I like the buffalo. I think those are probably coyotes or wolves hanging out with buffalo. They could be buffalo calves, I suppose. This is the same panel. A really nice owl. A flying bird, a crane or a heron maybe. This is Whitey. Look, he's got overalls on, cowboy hat. He's driving cattle. He's got a whip in his hand, and he doesn't tell you that's one of us. This creature, this weird creature here, at first I thought it might be a beaver chewing on a tree. And I now believe it's probably a bear. But I'll show you why in a second when I believe that. It doesn't look like either a beaver or a bear. This is the same panel. I think that's a beaver. That looks like a beaver. He's got teeth and a tail. Different artists, same panel, but these horses and riders are quite different. Triangular bodies, carrying shields, very little detail really on either the horses or the riders, riding past the teepee village. Who's down in the canyon? I never think of teepees in the canyons, but they're over there. Nice buffalo. This is my other late historic rock art. This is sort of a classic elongated body horse. They're just beautiful. Some people think this is Abraham Lincoln. This is from the near the Harris site, the Sandy Wash on the plateau near the Harris site. My coworker John Horn, who's our historic specialist, said, "No, that's a Ute. Remember the guy's picture I told you to remember? He was wearing a peace medal and a top hat. On various occasions, Utes were taken back to Washington, D.C. to impress them with the power of the white man. And they came home with fancy clothes and invariably a peace medal with the current president's likeness on it. Well, John thinks that's what this guy is.
Hey, Jim, I need a timeout.
He one of these guys who went to Washington, D.C.
I need a timeout. Ready to take tape.
Okay.